Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Sharon Constanson, Chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce. First of all, I'd like to thank our hosts, of which a number of the individuals from Investec are present. And I'd like to thank Investec for becoming a strategic member of the Chamber. And just a quick word on our sponsors. One of our sponsors has not been mentioned up there, which is Bruce Jack. Bruce Jack wines were donated by them today. The Braai Club, if you like the biltong, donated by them today as well. And then we've got Gerard Perold, the grandson of Pinotage. Nice way to put it, isn't it? And he loves wine, so that's fine. He will be doing some tastings in addition to the quaffing you were wanting to do, if you wish. And then to Jill and to Louise of the SA UK Trust, who will come up and say a few words.
Thanks, Sharon. And yes, absolutely. Thank you to Investec. I was asked to talk, just to tell you briefly what the SA UK Trust Network is. And it's quite a wonderful coincidence because generally I say it's like the Chamber of Commerce is but for the non-profit sector. So there we go. It's easy. Our network is thanks to the brainchild of John Battersby and the High Commissioner at the time, Dr. Zola Squia. John was representing Brand South Africa, and he and the High Commissioner would constantly be asked by the organizations here, be they visiting or be they UK registered trusts, fundraising for their South African sister entities for money, because that's what they do, they have to fundraise. And one day John said to me, please, when you come to a meeting, we need to discuss these things. So we did. And between us, we came up with this concept. In fact, that's exactly what I said to John that day. Well, why don't we set up a network that's sort of like the Chamber of Commerce? And all these years on, 200 members later, we literally exist for exactly the same as the Chamber does on a business sort of networking level. We do this for the South African and Southern, the whole SADC region. So any organization here, generally known as a charity, fundraising for their sister entity in the SADC region are our members. We've had some amazing things happen through the networking because technically they're all in competition for the donated pound. But we've had some wonderful things happen. I've seen things such as shared containers being sent to South Africa with books and medical equipment and sporting equipment and great things. I've met a number of people like Louise, who you'll hear from in a moment. And I think we've co-organized 6 or 8 events over the years. So our members are technically in competition, but wow, we do a great deal when we work together. For the networking time, there's some of our trustees are here. There's Neliswa here. There's Kate Cooney over there, Kelvin Glenn, Peter Burden, and Louise, whom you'll hear about. So anything you want to know about it, and if any of you are involved in any way with an organization working for the greater good in South Africa, please talk to us. We'd love to have you join us.
Thank you. I'd like to call up Michael Butler of Nutton, who is going to share with you the value of commercial entities operating for the benefit of charities and themselves.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, everyone. Jill, thank you. I actually want to bring a real-life example of not sharing containers, but sharing charities and what people do. So I phoned Jill a long time ago and said, look, we're going up there. We've got 500 volunteers. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail. I'll speak to so-and-so. I'm not going to mention names. Speak to so-and-so. Anyway, so long story short, I get given 5,000 bras. All of us volunteers go out there and we go through customs and they go, is there anything to declare? And I'm like, no, all good, all good. They open it up and 500, 1,000 bras fall out. I did a lot of explaining to do. Anyway, I've got 7 minutes. Let me crack on. Probably going to touch on 3 things and then try and bring it all back round together and summarize it all. So very simple 3 things is I want to touch on ESG, CSR. Yeah, we do it a lot in South Africa. It's mandated around BEE. We all know what it is. But essentially, I kind of look at it in 2 ways or 3 ways. It's people, planet, and profit. Yeah, and the profit bit is important. It has to be a circular economy in terms of ESG. Secondly, it needs to be sustainable. It has to have longevity. It can't just be a once-off type of activity. And thirdly, it needs to be inclusive. Yeah, in the whole world of ESG, you see it happening in boardrooms, you see it happening there. But if it's not inclusive, either for your customers, your employees, or your communities, why are you doing it? So that's just a quick framework around ESG and CSR. Second one I want to touch on is Mellon Education. And whilst Sharon mentioned Newton, I'll get to that synergy in a minute. I met this incredible philanthropist, which a lot of you have met. I think he's been at the awards. He's won Lifetime Achievement Awards with the South African Chamber of Commerce. But 20 years ago, he walked into Hout Bay, into Imiamazetu, and said, "How can I help you?" And they went, "Well, leave, because you're going to get killed." Yeah. 20 years on, he's still doing an incredible job in the communities. First 10 years was all about housing and building houses. The second 10 years has very much been about education. 123,000 volunteers have come from the UK and around the world to South Africa and got their hands dirty and built with South Africans in the townships. 125,000 houses have been built in the first 10 years. Just a phenomenal achievement of what he's been able to do. And I'll tell you roughly how that's been able to happen. The second 10 years, he goes, "Right, let's get into education." It was obviously a passion of Mandela's at the time. So we started in education 10 years ago with a very, very focused agenda of educating 100,000 kids. 10 years on, we've built 45 schools. We've hit the target of 100,000 children being educated, and we've ticked all the things. In that whole journey of Mellon Educating, the vision that's always relating back to my first point around ESG, which is focusing around, do we all know about the UN Sustainability Goals? Yeah, all big nods. So when you're looking at the UN Sustainability Goals, I think they are 16 sustainability goals in either environmental, social, or governance. You've got to allow, and Jill, you know this from all the charity work and how you help with the charities, you've got to align to some of those goals, because otherwise you are not relevant. Yeah, and you talk about marketplaces, you've got to have relevance, you've got to have the relationships, and you've got to be able to drive revenue, kind of the 3 R's. But looking at Niall's vision for education, yes, it started on building, because that was the heritage of the charity. The focus was very fundamentally, how do we drive literacy? Building is one thing, but driving literacy is another. And it took probably 6 years for us to realize that the problem in education in South Africa is at that early stage, literacy area. Yeah. Foundational literacy. It came in Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address, where he fundamentally touched on that one area. So that's something that we have been involved in 4 years. And the whole ethos around that was saying, how do we create a circular economy? How do we create impact sourcing in terms of jobs? And how do we teach kids at early learning? So we take people out of the school when they finish their education. 71% of 15 to 24-year-olds are unemployed. Do you know that stat? Came out this year. So they come out of school, we hire them as tutors. We help them with the tutoring. We then get them to educate in hubs around the schools that we've built in separate hubs. Those tutors we pay for, we give them a job, and they start educating at grade R level foundational literacy with various technologies and brands and partners. So it creates a circular economy. We've launched it just recently. Already we are up to, God, how many hubs? 20 odd hubs, etc., where each hub creates sustainable jobs, creates the education, creates that circular environment, ticks all the boxes of the UN sustainability goals in a number of different areas. Because it's not just the school, it's not just the tutor, it's not just the kid, it's also the community. Okay, so that's touching on the second area. Second thing I'll talk about. Third thing I said I'd talk about was Nutton. Or we could say Newton. Tomato, not sure, but Newton. So Newton is a BPO organization in South Africa, Durban to be precise. It's a tier 2 challenger brand that's here in the UK selling its services to UK corporates to say, bring your call center and your customer service center out to South Africa. Again, if you look at the industry and the BPO industry, the business process outsourcing industry, and you look at South Africa, at the moment there are about 100,000 people in South Africa that currently service the international markets in BPO. The goal with the PESA, which is the governing body in South Africa, with the support of the DTI and the South African government, want to take that to 500,000, 600,000 in the next 5 years. So a huge growth. So for a company like Newton, who's a challenger brand, we're not going to target, we're not going to compete against some of those tier ones like Capita and Teleperformance and some of those, or T-Tech from the US, but we've got a very good story to tell. And the ethos of Newton really touches on, again, three things, apologies, is caring for it and looking after its employees. If you have happy customers and happy staff, you'll have happy customers that will come through on the phone in the call center. So how do we look after you as an employee? Secondly, how do we look after our clients? How do we deliver phenomenal, sophisticated customer service, recovery services, and all those areas around that? And the third area, which is very core to the heart of Newton, is how do we care for the community? How do we look at the wider community in which we service, et cetera, et cetera. So look at the values of Melon Educate, look at the ideals around ESG, and then look at the pillars and the ethos that Newton stand for. We introduce all three. Let's bring them all together. We bring all three together and we start brainstorming. What is the art of the possible? How can we bring all those bits together that really make a difference? And I'm not going to take credit for this, but what came out was this one, which was very, very simple. How do you articulate quite a challenging area, bring it all together? And it came under a banner called One, which was essentially one agent, one child. Very simple. For every agent that Newton employ on the ground looking after an international client, they will educate a child through the literacy program at foundational level with Melon Educate. It ticks the boxes, it works with the provinces, it works with the government, it works with the NGOs, it works with corporates, it works with all, and ticks all the boxes. But it's very simple. How can you bring something that's very complicated and articulated as quickly as possible, very simply? Elevator pitch, what is it? One agent, one child. All Newton's clients absolutely love it because they know that they are downstream supporting their ESG strategies. All the clients love it because they can actually come and build a school as well every November. They love it at a corporate level because it touches them and touches part of their ESG strategies as well. Newton staff love it because they know if they're sitting there on a call center making the calls, they know they're teaching a child. It's a motive. It helps with their well-being, it helps with their support. They can know that they can go and see the kids and everything around it, and it touches Newton's values. And then Melon Educate benefit, because they're not just getting funding, they're getting this huge engine where all three parties, from government to Melon Educate to Newton, all collaborate together for the common goal. So 3 things done. Have I done my 7 minutes? 11. Did I go 11? Oh, I'm trying to talk quickly. I'm getting off the stage. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Hello, everybody. Well, I'm Louise Seligman, and I'm a founder trustee of the SA UK Trust, a founder trustee of Breadline Africa, and a member of the Chamber. And I really want to talk about 2 things, which is how Breadline Africa has got to where it is today. And there are really 2 elements I feel that have really helped us get there. We're actually 30 years old this week. We started off as a group of volunteers. We now have a very professional staff. We placed our 1,000th unit earlier this year. We're impacting about 250,000 children. And we've just launched the Flush Challenge, with Mark Barnes, who's a very well-known businessman in South Africa, to try and eliminate pit toilets in South Africa, which is, quite a controversial issue because a lot of children have been drowning. Anyway, Breadline Africa supplies infrastructure for educational projects. That's really what we do, particularly for early childhood development. And we then do other things like clinics and so on. And we do this with our partners. We would not have got to where we are without the help of other NGOs. And once the SA UK Trust started, and I was able to meet a lot of other NGOs working in the same sector, but none of us knew what the others were doing, we were able to cut on our costs, increase our efficiency and our effectiveness. And I think this has done a lot to help with where we've got to. So we're working with about 40 other NGO partners throughout South Africa. We're quite unusual in working throughout the country. A lot of these charities are very small and very regional. So if you have an office or a factory in a particular area, we can probably put you in touch with an NGO working in that particular area so that your staff will benefit. Secondly, we have eventually cracked the corporate sector. It's taken a very long time, but we now have 30 corporates supporting us. And it is not us going out with a begging bowl, knocking on the door anymore. For all the NGOs, there's huge synergy. There's a lot to be gained on either side. We need you and you need us. We can provide, as Mark's already said, all the CSR opportunities, the BBEE points, the tax benefits, the morale boosting for staff, the team building, and it is a really good relationship, and it's been very, very effective and successful. And I think the fact that we're now gaining multi-year funding from these corporates really says it all. But I'm just an example of what can be done, and I really encourage you to go to your firms and try and persuade them to help, because there's a lot of benefit. And we have Kyle here, who is going to talk from Demon Solutions, who has, I hope, had good experience with Breadline Africa, but there are other corporates who've had good experiences with other SA UK Trust members. And, I'd just like to say that's something that should be encouraged and has certainly got us to where we are today. Thank you very much. And I introduce.
Thank you. My surname seems to cause a lot of problems. If you have a look, we're going to have a competition later to see who can actually pronounce it. I'm not saying that I'm going to win because I get it wrong often. So my name's Carl. I'm the Chief Consulting Officer at Demon Solutions. We're a people-first, people-centric technical consultancy based here in London. And we realize that making an impact, whether it be in technology or otherwise, stems from connections between people, how they interact. I often ask my clients, when last did a technology project fail because of technology? And I'm yet to receive an answer that isn't followed by a laugh, and then the stark realization of truth. Because of that, partnerships are as important as impact to us. How we connect with and work with people, both within and in between organizations, is especially important to us. And we take social impact quite seriously. We track ESG as a metric at our board. I introduced the Breadline to Demon Solutions because of the impact that they make. It's a very personal story for me. I knew Tim, who was the previous director at the Breadline many, many years ago, through my mom, who's worked in the NGO space for far too long, she would say. And we've conducted a whole bunch of initiatives to support them. Nothing that's raised eye-wateringly large sums of money, but what we have raised has been put to good use. And that's what's really, really important to us. There's also been quite a good team building exercise. We've done step challenges, we've done cake sales, we've done raffles. And last year, Nompemelulo Educare Center was open, partially funded by us. And we had a whole bunch of our South African colleagues that were able to attend and actually participate in the opening. And for us, it really cemented the commitment we have to social impact in quite a palpable and tangible way. Our employees rallied about how refreshing it was to work for business that didn't just talk about making an impact, but actually went out and did it. And I had to constantly remind them that we don't really do much. Breadline do all the work, we sell cakes and then work off the calories. But it's hard to laugh when you see a school actually be opened, or when you think about the amounts of lives that are going to be impacted. And that inspired us to continue our support. So it's rare to see any return on ESG investments, and it's rarer still to see a return that is so impactful. I believe that there are two basic ways to ensure the future of a nation, and that is education and entrepreneurship. And the latter is only possible because of the former. So education for me is an absolute priority to get right in general. And that's something we believe both on a personal level. I'm really, really passionate about Breadline. You'll see I use the word impact so many times. But also at an organizational level, being in technology, things move quickly, and education is absolutely fundamental to that. And we really love the fact that our funds have gone to something that is real, a project that we can see, something that we can get involved in and actually participate in. And that's something that's truly special, really, really special. I think the Breadline are doing amazing work, and it's really inspiring. And we look forward to supporting them as long as we can.
Thank you.
Cool. The baton.
Just a very quick introduction of His Excellency, the High Commissioner from the UK to South Africa. I've got to know Antony Phillipson over a number of years, 2 years now. Yep, and I knew you just before you got there. And what he has learned about South Africa, I'm sure mirrors what he learned about every other country he's ever worked in. And it's deep insights and knowledge that he has picked up in an incredibly short amount of time. I sit there and think, this is a Brit talking about my country, and he knows so much. It is extremely impressive. So I'm not going to take away his thunder. I'm going to leave him to have a chat to you first. We'll then have a few minutes in conversation afterwards, and then I think you'll be allowed to go drink.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I feel like a bit of an imposter whenever I come and speak about South Africa in London, because I feel I ought to be talking more about the UK when I'm in South Africa, but actually I think it's two sides of the same coin. For anyone who thought I was rudely sitting on my phone in the front looking at emails, what I was actually doing as I was listening to some of the first speakers, including Michael, was just sort of actually rewriting what I wanted to say to you this evening. Because I don't want to, if anyone thought they were coming for a keynote address about UK-South Africa relations, South Africa and the world and all the rest of it, I'm going to apologise in advance, because that's not what I want to talk about. Instead, what I'd quite like to say is a few words about, picking up on your point there, the 6 Ps, and one of them is going to be a cheat. So I want to talk about policy, purpose, partnerships, place, people, and then impact. Because I couldn't think of a way of getting the 6th one in. But I think actually all of what Michael's talked about, what Louisa talked about, what I'm not going to attempt your Mr. Helpfleich has talked about, indeed. But you've all talked about impact. And actually, I think ultimately that's what all of us who work for governments around the world are trying to do. But let me do a little bit of the, maybe I should have gone, my 6th P could have been po-faced. Let's do the po-faced bit on the policy. So, you know, I am posted out to South Africa. I have a network of people who I have the privilege to lead. There's another P in South Africa. There are actually about 300 of us across South Africa, which sometimes startles people when I say this. But we are there. We have a business plan. It has campaign goals. It talks about inclusive economic growth. It talks about climate. It talks about health and human development. It talks about upstream threats, which is not just about trying to protect the UK from upstream threats. It's about helping South Africa deal with threats around counterterrorism, anti-corruption, all these issues that I think are sort of bedeviling South Africa in the modern age. We also talk about South Africa and the world. So yes, we do talk about what South Africa's position is on topics like Russia and Ukraine. In the privacy of this room, anyone who wants to ruin my career can do so, probably quite quickly after this. I do wonder whether there is some rethinking going on in South Africa after the events over the weekend about what exactly their friendship with Russia looks like. But, you know, we'll see. I do think that they've probably now made it rather more straightforward in terms of whether President Putin is going to attend the BRICS summit in Johannesburg in August. I'm pretty sure he will not be leaving his country. So we'll see what happens on that. But actually, the reason why Russia, Ukraine, and South Africa and the world matters is I genuinely believe that it does matter what South Africa thinks about issues like territorial integrity, sovereignty, human rights, the rule of law. I believe them when they say to us that they believe in the UN Charter. I would like them to feel that we can work together to protect the UN Charter, including from those who would like to damage it, like Russia. So that's policy. Let's move that to one side just for a second. The second P was purpose. I'm pretty sure most people in this room will not have read it, but if you do ever have 5 minutes, I really would commend, and I don't say this just because I work for him, I would commend the speech that the Foreign Secretary made in December last year. I think he called the speech, you know, if you Google, if you want to find it, you can Google cleverly middle ground powers. And it was a speech that he gave at Mansion House in December. And he was talking about the type of relationship that the UK should have with countries like South Africa, but also a whole host of other countries in terms of the nature of our relationship, the type of our relationship. And just to quote one paragraph, because actually I find it quite easy to get behind this one. Our job is to make our case and earn their support, investing in relationships based on patient diplomacy, on respect, on solidarity, and a willingness to listen. Because this isn't about dictating or telling others what they should do. We want a balanced and mutually beneficial relationship based on shared interests and common principles. And actually, in terms of my country plan that I mentioned a second ago, that is really the framing of what I think we are trying to do across all of those policy issues in South Africa and indeed in a whole host of other countries. And the bits that I would highlight are willingness to listen, patient diplomacy, and respect, which whenever I talk about this, especially when I talk to groups in South Africa, they say that isn't what it has always felt like to us. And I will respect that view because I think I understand where it comes from. Last November, when His Majesty the King hosted President Ramaphosa for the state visit here in London and made a speech at the state banquet, I was there and I thought it was the most extraordinary occasion. I mean, it was a bit of a coincidence of happenstance that it was the first ever state visit hosted by the King. It might well have, in a different circumstance, been the last state visit hosted by Her Majesty the Queen. In some sense, it doesn't really matter. But actually, one bit of it does, which is that no one can ever take away from South Africa that they were the first state visit hosted by His Majesty the King. And I hope that means something to people in South Africa. And I'm not going to tell them it must mean something. I just hope they think about it. And it sort of resonates. And in his speech that evening, the King used a phrase that had been written for him by the system, i.e. me, which we rather deliberately picked up on some things that he had said in Bridgetown, Barbados, in October 2021, when there was that moment when Barbados moved away from becoming a realm to becoming a republic. Also, when he spoke to Commonwealth heads of government in Kigali in June 22. And we summed it up in the speech in November, where we talked about the fact that it is vital that we understand the consequences of our shared history if we're going to unlock the potential of our common future. And again, I think that is another pretty good way of framing what it is that we are trying to do. What is our purpose in a country like South Africa? Not just South Africa, but of course the only one I care about at the minute is South Africa. And you can then unwrap various bits from things like the integrated review. Michael mentioned the SDGs, which is certainly something that Andrew Mitchell, one of our ministers, cares deeply about. And if he was standing here now, he would tell you unashamedly that we are way off track of meeting the SDGs, but it's not too late as long as we actually start taking some action. So then the third P, just moving quickly on, is partnerships, because I do think this is about a partnership between the UK and South Africa. It is not about us telling South Africa what to do, whether it's on the Just Energy Transition Partnership, whether it's on what we want to do on inclusive economic growth, supporting their ambitions through Operation Brilliant Layla, whether it's through the trade and investment relationship, which again, most of the people I think in this room will speak to. You know, we want to create the conditions in which UK companies can trade and invest with South Africa, and indeed South African companies can trade and invest in and with the United Kingdom. It is not a one-way street, it is a two-way relationship. And I think that is fundamentally important. The other thing I care deeply about when it comes to partnerships is having conversations with groups like this, having conversations with the business community. You are the ones, and I have never ever shied away from saying this, whether it's when I was in Singapore or when I was in New York or now when I'm in South Africa. Governments can make lots and lots of speeches that are all very worthy, all very full of purpose and impact and everything else. But at the end of the day, it is business that creates jobs, business that creates wealth, business that creates growth. We will have a role on the government side. We will make policy, we will regulate, we will say that we have a right to protect the consumer, we will have a right to protect whatever, this, that, and that. But at the end of the day, it is business that creates growth and wealth and jobs. And our job is to work in partnership with all of you to make sure that we are getting it right. I also think there's something about partnerships with communities. And I hope this isn't sort of betraying a secret, but I'm really, really looking forward to an event that we will do in Cape Town in November with Breadline Africa, celebrating, I think, is it your 30th anniversary? Yeah, no. It's what we are there to do. It is not a gratitude thing, and I can't wait. It's going to be a fantastic event. And anyone else in the room who wants to do an event with us in Pretoria or Cape Town or Johannesburg, or indeed, moving on to my next piece, which is about place, anywhere else in South Africa, really, please do let me know how we can help you land the purpose and the impact that you want to have across that extraordinary country. Because on place, I'm very conscious that we are rather overly focused on Pretoria, Johannesburg, and Cape Town. That means that we miss out on Durban. It means that we miss out on Gqeberha. It means that we miss out on Mpumalanga, on Limpopo, on Northern Cape. And the reason why I mention all of that is in terms of the issues that the government is wrestling with, in terms of its own political challenge about how it delivers its ambitions, its priorities across the whole of South Africa, there is a big part of South Africa, in my view, that gets left out of the conversation. That's why I love working with people like the British Council, because I think they are on the ground in places that we're not, but it's also why I love working with people who have presence in other parts of South Africa. I really would love to work with them to bring that sense of impact. And then on people, you know, ultimately it's all about people. It's all about making connections between people, whether it's in government, in business, in the civil society. There's a rather pat phrase that I used to use quite a lot in Singapore when people would ask me to make speeches about diplomacy. And I'm not going to give you a speech about diplomacy this evening, but I am going to pull in this phrase, which is that diplomacy is the art of letting the other side have your way. And if we can really find a way of connecting between the various, communities in South Africa and the various communities in the UK in a way that actually makes it feel like we are trying to let them have their way, deliver their agenda, deliver their priorities, then I think we will give ourselves more of a chance of getting it right. So then the final P, which was my cheat, which was impact, I also wrote down is what is the point? Because ultimately, I think we do need to be clear about what it is that we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it. But ultimately, I do need to, I think, be able to answer the question about what we are doing with taxpayers' money in South Africa. I personally think we're doing an enormous amount with taxpayers' money in South Africa, and I think all of it is worth it. Do I want more? Yes. Am I realistic about getting more? Yes, because of, rather obvious sort of consequences that we're sort of dealing with at the UK end of this, and the government has not shied away from any of it. So I think, though, when I think about impact, it's about outputs, not inputs. It's about thinking what is the effect that we want to have on the ground and how do we work together to do it. It's about show, not tell. I think the reason I quoted that paragraph from the Foreign Secretary's speech is I don't think he believes in telling the world what to think about the United Kingdom. I think he wants to show the world what the United Kingdom can offer them and then allow them to draw their conclusion, which takes me back to my paragraph about diplomacy. I also think, though, it's about the future as much as the past. And that is not because I think we should dismiss what has happened in the past. South Africa is the most extraordinary country in terms of what it has gone through, not just actually up till 1994, but even since 1994. And when I sit there in the country, and as Sharon said, I've been there for 2 years, but I've studied quite a lot of South African history for various reasons, including, and I used to sort of slightly say not because of, but I'm slightly shading this now, You know, I was born in Johannesburg 51 years ago. My family were living in Johannesburg at a particular time in South Africa's history for reasons that, you know, I think are things that I am very conscious of. And the reason I mentioned that is for anyone who has not read it, I'm going to leave you with one final thought, which is a reading recommendation. And Darius, I think, is probably the only one who I'm going to have to apologize because he heard me say this at another talk yesterday. But there's an extraordinary book by a lady called Eve Fairbanks called The Inheritors, which was well reviewed by Alec Russell at the FT about a few months ago. And she talked about her reflections after 10 years in South Africa. And she talked about the fact that it is a country that is confronting not only a sense of mourning, and that's the word she used, for the past that was meant to arrive after 1994, and a sense of sort of fear, I think was the word that she used, about the past that might be approaching it now. And I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about that phrase, but I also don't think it's inevitable. South Africa does not need to confront the past that people are telling it is coming towards it now. It does not need to give up on the hope and the sense of opportunity after 1994. But ultimately, if they don't work in partnership with their friends, and I would certainly include the UK in that list, then it will become more difficult to actually realise the opportunity of what is an amazing, extraordinary country. And that's what I will certainly spend the next 2 years, at least, of my career trying to unlock. Thank you very much. Oh.
One of the questions I wanted to ask, and it's a complex one, but it's one that's facing South Africa in a big way right now, is we're running up into 12 months of an election, towards an election, approximately 12 months, give or take a few weeks or months. What can change? What can we hope for? And what is the worst case scenario? I only need one question, then we can go back and have a drink.
So maybe that should have been my 6th P is politics, because it does matter. And actually, the one thing I would say, it's not just in South Africa where there's going to be a sort of slightly interesting political moment.
Yeah, exactly.
12 to 15 to 18 months, although maybe ours will be less dramatic or consequential. So yes, of course, we spend a lot of time talking to people, including the business community, about what their assessment is of what will happen in South Africa. We know there will need to be an election next year. There still seems to be some doubt about whether it will be as early as April. Some suggest to us they might go for the neat 30th anniversary of the 27th of April and hold it on Freedom Day. Others suggest they might push it later in the year. But, you know, whatever happens, at some point there will be quite a significant political moment. I think I subscribe or support those who say that it is more likely than not that the ANC will drop below 50%, not least because they did so in the local and municipal elections in late 21. But actually, I don't think it's a given. You know, I think there are lots of scenarios in which the ANC sort of creeps back above 50%. I think if they fall just below 50, then some of this is obvious, so forgive me. Then maybe they can cobble together a coalition with a couple of little parties and they will remain firmly in the driving seat. But I also believe that even if they fall, say, short of 45% of the MPs in Parliament and need to make a serious coalition agreement with probably one of the DA, or some seem to think more likely the EFF, that, you know, the ANC will still be the biggest party. I think the ANC will still hold the presidency. I, again, observe no more that there are some who feel that in that scenario, it might mean that there is a different ANC president. But, you know, the final thought, and I'm going to apologize in advance because it sounds like a cop-out, is there's not a lot I can do to affect this. There's certainly nothing I plan to do to affect this, other than to continue to offer ourselves, as I said earlier, in sort of partnership with the current government to address their issues, whether it's the just energy transition or their issues around, you know, working with them, sometimes more quietly than people sometimes assume, around issues like anti-corruption and recapacitating sort of some of the internal sort of functions of the state. You know, we are going to continue to work in partnership with South Africa up to the election next year, and then beyond the election next year. And we will, like others, wait to see what that looks like. I'm certainly not about to start saying that we should pause here because of an assumption that that might happen in a year's time, because it may not. But also because I don't actually think that we should be giving people any kind of reason to believe that we either want to influence or can influence what happens in South Africa's domestic politics. And as I say, that might also sound a bit po-faced, but I just think that's the only way we can do this.
One of the things that's really important in South Africa's economy is educating our children, creating employment, reducing the crime, narrowing the gap between those that have and have not, but particularly getting as many people as we can into the employment world. So is politics, in your view, helping that agenda, or is it up to people like us, and I know it has been said tonight, that it is up to business to do a lot of the creation of employment and the creation of jobs? But is government pulling their side to that bargain at the moment, in your view, from what you can see as an outsider?
So again, I mean, I think I touched on this earlier. It can't be for one side or the other. I mean, you know, in terms of well-functioning liberal market democracies, you need an open, honest conversation between government, between the private sector. Certainly when I was in New York, it was just after the UK government was launching what it called its industrial strategy. And it was very much about a partnership between the public sector, the private sector, and the academic sector. I still think those are the key pillars of this discussion. But as I said earlier, at the end of the day, you know, government can create jobs, but they're not going to be meaningful, sustainable jobs. The real jobs that create a sustainable, inclusive growth path come from the private sector. Mm-hmm. But the government has a role to play in terms of creating a framework through policy, through regulation, incentives, disincentives, the rule of law, that mean that businesses have certainty, have predictability, have opportunity. Mm-hmm. Do I think that, you know, it could be better in South Africa around those issues? Unreservedly, I would say yes, not least because I think the South African government has said yes. You know, that's the whole point of things like Operation Vulindlela. Do I think that we can help them, whether it's in terms of an economic partnership with the National Treasury, whether it's in terms of the partnerships we signed with the government in the state visit around health, science and innovation, critical minerals, again, economic partnership and skills? Do I think there's more that we could and would love to do around education, working through the British Council, both at primary, secondary, tertiary level? You know, all of this, yes, yes, and yes. I actually think that the South African government, you know, knows what it wants to do. I think we will position ourselves as a partner if they choose to do it. But I do think we will also be a little bit cautious, partly because of our own particular context, our own particular history, that we don't want to topple over into telling them what to do. But that's all right, because I think they know what they want.
And last question, more on a personal level. You would have had time in this 2 years to meet with Cyril Ramaphosa, President, and with his presidency's office and the various people around him who advise him and some who work with him. We've got some in the room with us today. What is he like as a person? Does he deserve all the pushback that is occurring right now? And if you were him, what would you do differently for the next year?
How on earth is that the last question? Or even a fair one? That should be the... So, you know, I've had the pleasure of meeting him a few times, including, you know, working with his team, with the foreign ministry in the run-up to the state visit last year. And then, you know, I found myself on the morning after the state visit when he had stayed on, and I door-stopped him in the hotel lobby after he was coming back from a bookshop. And we had a really nice chat. And, you know, I do think he has a plan, and you know, the plans are written out. And I do think that he welcomed not only actually the state visit, but, you know, I think he welcomed being invited by us to the G7 summit in 2021. I think he and his team in the presidency and the foreign ministry and other ministries, when we talk to them, as I said earlier, whether it's about the climate transition, whether it's about skills and education, you know, I think they recognise that we have something to offer in terms of delivering their agenda. So that is what we are going to remain absolutely focused on.
Thank you very much to all of you. Really appreciate. Most importantly to you.